Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Cube Vanguard. I am back, more or less. You say I was away. Did I go on a trip? Did I take a vacation? No, I got miserably sick for 6 days, or 7 days. I haven't been that sick since 2020. Even Omicron in January of 2022 was nowhere near as bad as this. And I don't think it was COVID because person who also got something very similar, who works with me, tested multiple times, never got a positive result, and I ran out of tests anyways. But nevertheless, sickness is sickness, and I think probably because of this working from home for 3 years, maybe I got a little bit weaker, maybe not, maybe it was just bound to happen. Nevertheless, it was pretty miserable. The weather was also miserable too, so it was a nice combination. It was raining and cold. So, you think of spring, the birds chirping, the sun out, the flowers, whatever. No, this was spring lying down, looking at the ceiling, wondering what the meaning of life was. Meanwhile, when you get enough strength to get some fresh air, you go out and you freeze to death and you come back and you feel sicker. So it was one of those, complete encapsulations in depression, which we sometimes go through. Nevertheless, you just have to be, tough, or not tough, but you have to just be just try to distract yourself is the best thing. So, video games, if you have the strength for that, destroy the diet if you can eat. But yeah, it was not pleasant at all. And again, I kind of forgotten what it was like to sit there and not be able to do anything. So, needless to say, I didn't do much casting. I didn't do much Kubernetes. I had to just get my normal work done more or less as much as I could from home. But yeah, so that's and I'm almost back to normal, but still, it's been a while since I've had so much fun. Anyway, so I promised to do a series of talks about the Kubernetes documentation, the Kasten documentation. I'm still sewing my brain back together after being obliterated with chills, and it was that bad. In fact, at one point, I went to get my phone. And I did chills one night, and I was shaking so hard I couldn't hold it. And I thought, well, this is a way to cure, your dependence on social media. Just get really sick, and then it's all. So, anyways, yeah, it wasn't fun. I'm not gonna exaggerate. That was actually quite unpleasant. So, I want to talk about the Kasten installation or the Kasten documentation. Continue the series. Again, it's not that you don't read documentation. Some people don't. Some people do. It's just that, different people see different things in them. And I've gone through this documentation quite a few times. And I just find certain things that I go back to because they're so important and they stick out, especially if you're new. Again, if you're brand new to this, there's certain things that you might not see right away, which perhaps I did. Okay, so let's take a look at the next page that we were going to do last time. And that was the installing K10 page. Now, you look at this, go, oh my goodness, look at all this stuff, but really, it focuses in on, for instance, different distributions. So and there's certain things like K10 image source repositories, which you would need if you're doing a air gap installation, which is actually quite popular in certain circles. But I'm just going to point out a few kind of basic things. The overlay, so to speak, it's a very popular term in Docker and Kubernetes to some extent. So there's, at the beginning of the page, just a description of the two types of Kastens available, the default starter edition and the enterprise edition. Remember, you can always run 5 nodes for free. So for testing environments, you can run 5 nodes. There was, by the way, a discussion on the hub a little while ago about what constitutes a node that's actually working. As I understand, it's basically any node that can run workloads. So I think it's going to look for a label or tolerate a label on the node, and that's how it's going to work. To determine whether or not that node gets licensed or not. We'll have to come back to that later, but I just wanted to point that out. Okay, so what I personally like right away is you read all that stuff, but the pre-flights checks is excellent because right away it takes away a lot of the necessity of you doing actually some work. And why is that? Well, because they give you a script here, and you can just run it by curling it and then piping it into bash, and it will run and give you a readout of your system and whether or not it's ready to leverage Kasten or not. Now, one little caveat here. If you are running, for instance, Kasten on Rancher desktop inside of Windows, like I'm doing here as a default, as a kind of test environment, It might come up with the wrong results simply because this is really made for real production area. It might not, I can't remember, but I think I've already installed Cast and I ran it. It was showing me the things were missing, but I think that's because I've tweaked my Rancher desktop for certain purposes. So keep that in mind. But if it's a normal installation, this is very, very helpful because it'll tell you right away what's missing. To the very simple things, like you haven't created a Kasten.io namespace, and that's where you're trying to install, where it expects it, to other things. There's a list there. Now, it also tells you how to do the pre-flight checks in an air-gapped environment. Okay, now, air-gapped environments, you'd say, well, in what case would that be? Well, there's all sorts of things. I mean, you might have an airplane which with no connectivity or something. I'm just thinking off the top of my head, although there were in airplanes, Kubernetes and airplanes, running, believe it or not, and with testing, upgrading as they're flying. It's another story, but again, so there you go. You can actually run this in air-gapped, okay? And then, of course, it goes through the prerequisites. You need a K10 or Kasten namespace IO, and it tells you to do that. And you want to set your global persistent storage class, okay? So now, if you've got one set by default, it'll just grab that one, okay? So, and for testing environments, I really wouldn't worry too much about this. However, for production, as they say, they're hoping or they're assuming it's going to be your storage class can be backed by fast storage, so SSDs, okay? But for testing, you don't really need that. And down here it tells you the source repositories, so you know where some of these things are coming from, like Grafana, obviously, some of the extras. Okay, let's go back to our installation. So that's simple enough. So after you've done that, you know what you need to run. And then it actually comes to the installing K10 on Kubernetes. And here it's wonderful because it actually shows you all sorts of distributions. So you can go to the actual distribution that you're going to be installing on right away and pick it. So for instance, if you're doing a test, you might want to install K10 on Kind, which is Kubernetes in Docker, which is running Kubernetes in Docker containers. I think each node is a container. So let's take a look at that. And right off the bat, it's going to warn you that it's really for a quick evaluation. You really can't run your massive production in Kubernetes and Docker, but for evaluations, for little tests or demos, you can do that. But what's really nice here, and why I'm pointing it out, is it's also going to tell you how to install the CSI host path driver. That's what I like to use. That will use your local host storage for your Kubernetes cluster, but with a CSI driver. So in other words, you can do snapshots for casting and things like that, demos. Not production, it's not made for production, but it's very useful for demos, sales demos, tutorials, and whatnot. So I like the fact they've got you here, and they are showing you how to install the volume snapshot, the external snapshotter, and then the host path driver, okay? And with that, as you see here, kubectl apply f example CSI storage class, that is that storage class. So that's the one you want to pick. In fact, I have a little Kubernetes running here, obviously, because in my free time, that's what I like to do. And I will show you what I've got set up. Now, so let me just clear my little mess I've been making. So let's take K, get storage class, and you will see my storage class. If it's running, yes, it is. Now, this is Rancher Desktop, and I've installed the CSI host path driver. But you'll notice something weird here and annoying, and I haven't fixed it yet. It's got two default storage classes. Right? That's like having two default gateways. Not a good thing. What happens is that every time I start up the machine, I haven't fiddled yet with the, this is K3S under the hood of Rancher Desktop. It's going to come up every time and bring that local path up. But of course, it remembers that I'd already picked CSI host path driver. So there's a way of fixing it. I've just been too lazy to do it. I just normally go and do the command here, patch, 1 second, back, CTL, patch, I just copied it, boom. And now we do it, and you will see that the local path is no longer default. So I should just change that for good, but I tend to reinstall my Rancher Desktop all the time. Not Rancher Desktop, but the Kubernetes version there. I mix versions, I test environment. So keep that in mind. All right, but the CSI host path driver does not come with Rancher Desktop or with K3S by default, so I installed it. And I could have used the same instructions here, which are present on the in the installation for the Kind, okay? Now, further down, just installing K10, very simple. It's basically K10 install, Kasten, K10 namespace, Kasten IO, boom, okay? And, they've got the annotation here, so that's what you want to do. You want to annotate so that K10 knows that the volume snapshot class is the CSI host path snap class, okay, which you will use for snapshots. So this is excellent for doing demonstrations. Okay, and then it tells you how to get to the dashboard by just doing a port forward. So you can do that there. With Rancher Desktop, I will remind you, it's K3S. It has traffic as a default ingress, and out of the box, it works. You just have to put, in your command, the Helm command, ingress. We'll look at that a little bit too. Okay, so there's K3S here. So it's basically the same thing. It's telling you to look at the storage class. Maybe different storage classes. You might have something else. You might have OpenEBS ZFS, or you might be using Longhorn. Now, Longhorn, I've had some issues with that one, so I'll have to come back to that at some point. But basically, you don't necessarily have to use CSI host path. You can use anything else. And then installing K10 on other distributions, Kubernetes distributions. This is one, for instance, for Kube ADM installations, vanilla ones. You could use that as well. Again, the basic install is the same, but on this Helm install, you're going to have to add on things, for instance, depending on how you want to access your dashboard. So, for instance, if you want to use a node port, if you want to use ingress, you'd have to do that. So some extra work there involved, but that's what it's saying as far as if you wanted to not install on the other distributions. Now, when it comes to Red Hat or AWS, for instance, then that goes into the idiosyncrasies of those. And in that case, as you can see here, there's Helm-based, as you can do. We just did with, well, we didn't do it, but we were telling you about it, the kind, but there's also operator-based, okay? So, OpenShift is a heavily operator organization, distribution, so massive operators. In fact, if you download the local OpenShift, which used to be called Code Ready Containers, it's very heavy because there's so many operators. Not all of them are even working by default. So there you go. There's a thing there called Operator Hub. It makes it quite a lot easier, and they give you all the instructions. So it's very clear, and I've tried it once. I didn't have any problems. Now, it's also available in SUSE Rancher Apps Marketplace and in AWS Marketplace. I have not done those ones, but it shouldn't be a problem. Okay, further down, it talks about things like storage integration. Okay, so CSI is really the main one. However, not only, and also talks about generic storage, backup and restore. So generic storage, again, if you don't have a CSI driver, you've got storage, you can use sidecars. Sidecar will come up, hook onto the storage as well, and then back it up that way. Okay, it's not really what you want to do. You really want to try to stick to CSI, but in worst case scenarios, you can use that. Dev environments, test environments. Shareable volume backup or restore, again, it's a different type of storage. Air gap install, I'll talk about that. That's getting more and more popular for workloads that have to be separated for security reasons, especially. So that's one area. Let's say you have Prometheus in your organization already. You can tweak it so that it'll scrape from the K10 install, and so you don't have to run the Prometheus that's in there, I believe. And very importantly, there's a complete list of K10 options, okay, Helm options. So most time you're doing Helm install. So here, basically, you can see everything that you need to know when it comes to Helm. Okay, so very important. And I've gone into here and fiddled around, changing things from I can't remember. Well, the ingress, for instance, or you can do token enabled or basic authentication. You can do that. Okay. All right. So this is just, we're running out of time. Anything else which I find very exciting here? Yes, pre-install, post-install. So let's look at post-install. We've literally got 1 minute left. I'm looking at my time. So I like the fact it gives you a post-install instruction. What can you do once you've completed? So set up your disaster recovery, encryption key, monitoring, user roles. Very nice. All right, that's it for this week. New lights, new camera, and new me after being viciously sick. So hopefully next week I'll have a little more energy. See you next week.